Good afternoon. You're looking live at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where SpaceX is counting down to liftoff of the Starlink 4-27 mission this afternoon at 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1921 UTC. This mission will be carrying 53 more Starlink internet satellites into orbit from here at Cape Canaveral. I'm Stephen Clark from spaceflightnow.com. I'll be joining you throughout the countdown and the 15-minute flight sequence this afternoon as the Falcon 9 deploys these 53 new Starlink satellites into orbit. We're an hour and 16 minutes from this afternoon's instantaneous launch opportunity. That liftoff is targeted for 3:21 and 20 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. Now, 1 hour and 5 minutes from this afternoon's instantaneous launch opportunity at 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1921 UTC. You're continuing to watch live views of Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, about 4 miles away from our camera position here at the Kennedy Space Center. You can see it is a hot day. The heat waves are in full display here as the Falcon 9 is vertical on pad 40, 4 miles distant. This mission is designated Starlink 4-27. It's carrying 53 Starlink satellites into orbit for SpaceX's privately funded internet network to provide consumer-grade broadband services around the world. This will be the 37th launch of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket this year, and the 36th orbital space launch attempt from Cape Canaveral or the Kennedy Space Center this year. The lion's share of those launches have been conducted by SpaceX in 2022. Everything is on schedule right now for an on-time launch at 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time. The most recent official launch weather outlook that we've received from the 45th Weather Squadron, which is part of the Space Force's Space Launch Delta 45 here at the Cape, indicated a 50% probability of favorable weather, 50-50 odds for go or no-go weather for this afternoon's launch. However, the weather conditions currently are favorable for launch, an hour and 3 minutes away from liftoff time. We'll see how those trends evolve over the next 63 minutes. But right now, everything is go for launch weather-wise, and as far as we can tell from a technical standpoint. And we'll be monitoring the countdown throughout the next hour and few minutes. The next major milestone in the countdown will be the start of propellant loading. That is scheduled to begin at T-minus 35 minutes with the start of loading kerosene and liquid oxygen into the first stage of the Falcon 9. Also at T-minus 35 minutes, at the same time as the start of prop load, the automated countdown sequencer will take control of the countdown. And at that point, the members of the SpaceX launch team will be in a monitor mode to oversee the operation run by the computer in the final 35 minutes before liftoff. The Falcon 9 out on pad 40 stands 229 feet, or 70 meters tall. It is powered by 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage. There is a single Merlin engine on the second stage. And SpaceX plans to recover the reusable booster stage on a drone ship northeast of Cape Canaveral. About 9 minutes after launch is when we expect to see that first stage make its vertical landing on the landing barge east of Charleston, South Carolina, or about 400 miles northeast of the Cape. While we wait for the launch, we ask that you please like our stream if you haven't already. This helps us gain a larger audience and a larger reach for our launch coverage, so we really appreciate it if you just click that like button under our video stream. That really helps us out. We just passed T-minus 1 hour, now inside 60 minutes until liftoff this afternoon of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. You're continuing to watch a live view of the Falcon 9 as it awaits its launch opportunity this afternoon. Now approaching T-minus 56 minutes and counting. The 53 Starlink satellites for today's launch are flat packed inside the payload shroud of the Falcon 9. That's the bulbous bullet-shaped component of the rocket at the very top of the Falcon 9. Inside that aeroshell are these 53 Starlink satellites, which were built by SpaceX on an assembly line factory in Redmond, Washington, near Seattle. And with these 53 satellites, SpaceX will surpass the 3,100 satellite launched milestone. 3,055 satellites have been launched to date, 53 more going to space this afternoon. By large measure, by nearly an order of magnitude, SpaceX has the largest operating satellite fleet in orbit today. SpaceX's countdown is now at the T-minus 45-minute point. The countdown is about 10 minutes away from the expected time that the propellants will begin loading into the Falcon 9 rocket out at Space Launch Complex 40. The propellant loading poll of SpaceX's launch team is currently underway. This is an electronic poll, so you won't be hearing the go, no-go calls from every member of the launch team. This is done electronically by SpaceX, but we do expect to hear a call from the SpaceX launch team sometime shortly before the T-minus 35-minute mark to confirm whether the poll was go or no-go for entering that terminal countdown sequence. The final 35 minutes of the countdown are governed by an automated sequencer. This is a computer-controlled countdown beginning at T-minus 35 minutes. And at the same time as that sequencer begins its work, propellant will begin loading into the Falcon 9 for this afternoon's launch. Liftoff remains scheduled for 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 19:21 UTC. This mission will be carrying 53 Starlink internet satellites into orbit. Now T-minus 41 minutes and 42 seconds. Less than 7 minutes from the time that the countdown sequence will begin to pick up the pace of activity with the start of propellant loading. That is scheduled to begin at T-minus 35 minutes. Weather conditions here on Florida's Space Coast continue to look favorable for a launch this afternoon, despite some iffiness and some uncertainty in the forecast going into today. There was a forecast for some thunderstorm activity around the Cape Canaveral area this afternoon, but so far those storms have held off. SpaceX's countdown now passing the T-minus 40-minute mark, 5 minutes to go until the start of propellant loading. We'll be listening in for that call in the next few minutes. But until then, I want to show you what these Starlink satellites look like as they're in launch configuration. The picture on the left of your screen is a file photo provided by SpaceX from a previous Starlink launch last year. This shows a stack of Starlink satellites being readied for encapsulation inside the Falcon 9's payload fairing. One half of that payload shroud is seen here behind the satellites, moving around them for encapsulation inside a clean room. So this stack of satellites is very representative of what is on board today's mission, ready for launch in a little more than 39 minutes. Each of these satellites is stacked one on top of the other inside the payload fairing, and together the 53 satellites pretty much max out the Falcon 9's volume and mass capability for its ability to carry a payload into orbit. It fills much of the payload fairing and pretty much maxes out the lift capacity in terms of mass for the Falcon 9 rocket. This slide shows some of the key features and stats on the Starlink satellites. There are 53 on board today's mission. Each satellite weighs between 250 and 300 kilograms. And each spacecraft, after deploying from the Falcon 9, will unfurl solar panels to begin charging their batteries. And then after a period of checkouts, they'll activate ion propulsion systems that are fed by krypton gas in combination with electrical power to accelerate that krypton gas through the thruster system to generate an impulse of energy. And that ion propulsion system allows the satellites to actually climb from their drop-off altitude, which is between 150 and 200 miles approximately above Earth, up to an operational orbit at 335 miles or 540 kilometers. These satellites are built on an assembly line that SpaceX has developed at its Starlink factory in Redmond, Washington. This is what a Starlink user terminal looks like. So Starlink consumers can purchase this terminal and then pay a monthly fee for consumer-grade broadband service provided through the Starlink satellites. This terminal, this antenna, actually points to the sky and will receive internet signals from the Starlink satellites as they pass overhead. The satellites on today's mission are heading to an inclination of 53.2 degrees. This is also known as shell number 4 in the Starlink constellation. There are 5 Starlink orbital shells or layers at all at an altitude of roughly 535 to 550 kilometers in that range of altitude, but at different inclinations at 53.0 and 53.2 degrees. Those are mid-inclination orbits. And then there are also inclinations at 70 degrees and then 2 distinct That's the call out from SpaceX's launch team that the team pulled go.
Net. Launch control will abort the launch auto sequence and immediately proceed into launch abort. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands off, relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count.
Now approaching T-minus 36 minutes, so we did hear from SpaceX Launch Control that the team is go for propellant loading and launch. That propellant loading is set to begin at T-minus 35 minutes. Liftoff remains set for 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time or 19:21 UTC. Just to wrap up what I was talking about a second ago, there are 5 layers, 5 shells in the Starlink network. This mission is going to shell number 4. 2 of these shells are at mid-inclination orbits at 53 and 53.2 degrees. And then there are 2 shells in polar orbit at about 97.5 degree inclination. Those launch out of Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. And then there's another shell known as shell number 2 at a 70 degree inclination orbit. There's only been 1 launch into that shell so far. Right now, SpaceX is focusing on mid-inclination and polar orbits for the Starlink deployments. T-minus 33 minutes and counting. We expected to hear the call from SpaceX's launch team a couple of minutes ago to confirm the start of propellant loading. We didn't hear that call out, but just a few moments before then, we did hear that the team was go for propellant loading. So we do expect that started on time, but we'll stand by for confirmation of that milestone. Now passing T-minus 32 minutes. Again, if you're just joining us, you're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 40, where the Falcon 9 rocket is set for liftoff at 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1921 UTC, carrying the next batch of SpaceX's Starlink Internet satellites into space. If you're just joining us, I'm Stephen Clark, editor of spaceflightnow.com, and I'm reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center, just a few miles away from the Falcon 9 launch pad. The view you're seeing now is from my position at the Kennedy Space Center press site. It is a hot afternoon here in Florida, evident by the heat waves between us and the launch pad. But right now, weather appears favorable for liftoff at 3:21 p.m. Eastern. If you haven't had a chance yet, we ask that you please like our stream. You can click the like button, and that really helps us gain a bigger audience and extend our following and extend our reach for our launch coverage. Also, you're invited to become a member of our YouTube channel. If you join at one of the various membership levels, you'll be supporting our coverage, helping us bring you coverage like you're getting today of this Starlink mission, as well as future flights coming up in the next few days and weeks. Depending on which membership level you choose, you will gain access to exclusive video features from our perch here at the Kennedy Space Center. We have wonderful access to a lot of the launch operations here in Florida, and we're trying to bring that to you as much as we can. Now a half hour until liftoff at 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1921 UTC. You can also contribute to us through the Super Chat function here on YouTube. And if you do that, we do appreciate your support. We just received an update from SpaceX that the weather conditions have indeed improved. As I mentioned, weather is trending in the right direction, and we just received an update from SpaceX that the forecast now shows a 70% probability of favorable weather for launch this afternoon. That's up from 50% in the previous forecast. T-minus 26 minutes and 20 seconds. The launch countdown began its automated sequence at T-minus 35 minutes. And here's an overview of that countdown timeline. Propellant loading also began at T-minus 35 minutes with kerosene and liquid oxygen loading into the first stage of the Falcon 9. Kerosene fuel is also flowing into stage 2 at this time. That will be completed. Kerosene loading into stage 2 will be completed at about T-minus 20 minutes. And then liquid oxygen loading into stage 2 will begin down at T-minus 16 minutes as seen here in this timeline. At T-minus 7 minutes, the Falcon 9 will begin thermally conditioning its 9 M1D first stage engines. These Merlin engines will be conditioned for flight through a procedure known as chill down. Small amounts of super cold propellant will be flowed through some of the engine plumbing to condition those components for engine start and the more rapid flow of propellant during the flight. At about T-minus 5.5 minutes, the kerosene load onto the first stage will be completed. At that point, the rocket will be fully fueled with kerosene. Liquid oxygen will continue flowing into the vehicle until about T-minus 2 minutes or so, at which point the propellant loading systems will be secured and the vents or the valves will be closed. Fill and drain valves will be closed for flight. At about T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back structure, that's the mast that you see on the right side of the Falcon 9 in this view on the right of your screen, will be retracted to its intermediate position about 1.5 degrees from the Falcon 9 rocket. At T-minus 1 minute, the onboard computer on the Falcon 9 will take command of the countdown. The onboard computer will then control the countdown through the remainder of the sequence down to liftoff. Propellant tanks on the Falcon 9 will be brought up to flight pressure, also beginning in the final minute of the flight. And at T-minus 45 seconds, SpaceX's launch director will verify their go for liftoff. At T-minus 3 seconds, the engine controller on the Falcon 9 will command the 9 Merlin first stage engines to begin their startup sequence. And once those engines pass an automated health check in that final moment before liftoff, the Falcon 9's computer will send the command to open clamps at the base of the rocket on the launch pad side, allowing the Falcon 9 to begin its ascent into orbit this afternoon. Today's mission will mark the 171st flight of a Falcon 9 rocket since June the 4th, 2010, when the first version of the Falcon 9 made its debut launch from this very same launch pad here in Florida. It's the 179th flight of a Falcon rocket overall. This includes Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and Falcon 1 missions in SpaceX's rocket family. It's the 9th flight of this reusable booster, booster number 1062. It's the 147th Falcon 9 launch from Florida, the 94th Falcon 9 launch from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, and the 149th launch overall from this pad. This launch site dates back to the 1960s. It was used as a Titan rocket launch pad by the Air Force for several decades, and then handed over to SpaceX by the Air Force in 2007 for conversion to support Falcon 9 launches. It's the 113th flight, rather, of a Falcon 9 with a reused first stage booster. So 113 of the 171 Falcon 9s launched to date have flown with a reused booster after today. It's the 56th Falcon 9 launch, primarily dedicated to the Starlink program, and it's the record-extending 37th SpaceX launch of the year and the 36th orbital launch attempt from Cape Canaveral so far in 2022. This includes flights by SpaceX, United Launch Alliance, and Astra. T-minus 22 minutes and counting. We're a couple of minutes away, about a minute and a half away now from the expected completion of kerosene loading onto stage 2. This is the first of the 4 propellant tanks that will be filled up for today's flight. T-minus 19 minutes and 33 seconds. You can see gaseous oxygen vapor is venting out at pad 40. This is the so-called big vent that occurs at about the T-minus 20-minute mark, indicating that propellant loading is continuing on schedule. The vent occurs shortly after the completion of RP1 kerosene fuel loading onto stage 2, so that should now be complete. And the vent is associated with the preparations to load liquid oxygen into the second stage, because that liquid oxygen, chilled down to several hundred degrees below zero, needs to flow up pipes, or a pipe, up the strongback mast and into stage 2. So those transfer lines leading up the strongback are currently being conditioned for that liquid oxygen loading, which begins in about 2 minutes or so. Everything looking good right now for an on-time launch of the Falcon 9 rocket and the Starlink 4-27 mission at 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1921 UTC. T-minus 15 minutes and 30 seconds. The booster flying on today's mission is known as booster number 1062. This is its 9th flight today. This reusable booster debuted back on November 5th of 2020 with the launch of a U.S. military GPS satellite. It landed on one of SpaceX's drone ships, was refurbished for another GPS mission the following June of 2021. And then it continued its career with the historic launch of the first all-private orbital crew mission, the Inspiration 4 flight, with a crew of 4 commercial astronauts on board. This was last September. It then flew a Starlink mission in January of this year. It launched another crew of 4 on a commercial crew mission to the International Space Station managed by Axiom on April the 8th. And then since then it's launched 3 satellite missions 2 Starlink flights and a flight with the Egyptian Nowsat 301 communications satellite. The most recent launch was 26 days ago on July the 24th with a previous batch of Starlink satellites, and here it is again today on the pad, awaiting liftoff with 53 more Starlink satellites on the Starlink 4-27 mission. This booster will again aim for landing on a drone ship. The drone ship, a shortfall of Gravitas, is on station about 400 miles or 650 kilometers northeast of the Cape Canaveral area, roughly due east of Charleston, South Carolina, as you can see on this map. The approximate location of the drone ship is labeled here. The red line is the expected ground track to the northeast for today's flight. The Falcon 9 will be heading parallel to the east coast over the Atlantic Ocean to line up with one of the orbital planes in the Starlink constellation at an inclination of 53.2 degrees to the equator. That inclination value means that the satellites, as they circle the Earth, will run between 53.2 degrees north and south latitude during each orbit. The starting point for today's flight, Space Launch Complex 40, is also labeled here on Florida's Space Coast. So this is the expected ground track to the northeast from Cape Canaveral, a familiar launch profile on tap today if you've been following these Starlink missions. And we've brought a full screen view of Pad 40 up again, 13 minutes until liftoff of the Falcon 9. Propellant loading is now in the final stages this afternoon. In parallel with propellants, kerosene and liquid oxygen that are being loaded into the Falcon 9, SpaceX is also pumping high pressure helium into the Falcon 9 rocket. This is used to maintain pressure inside the propellant tanks during the flight. T-minus 12 minutes and 30 seconds. Now inside of 9 minutes until liftoff. If you've just joined us, you're watching a live view of Space Launch Complex 40, where the Falcon 9 rocket is now in the final phase of propellant loading. That propellant loading should be completed in the next 5 to 6 minutes in preparation for liftoff with 53 Starlink internet satellites in about 8.5 minutes. After liftoff, the Falcon 9 will head northeast from Cape Canaveral, as I showed you a few moments ago in that map. Here is the timeline of the critical flight events today. The Falcon 9 will exceed the speed of sound in about a minute. It will pass the phase of maximum aerodynamic pressure, also known as max Q, about T plus 72 seconds. The Falcon 9's 9 first stage engines, producing about 1.7 million pounds of thrust, will burn for 2.5 minutes. Then that first stage will separate and begin its maneuvers to head back for the landing on the drone ship. The second stage will ignite its single Merlin vacuum engine. That MVAC engine, as it's known, will fire for about 6 minutes to place the Starlink satellites into their transfer orbit. The payload fairing, or nose cone, of the Falcon 9 will be jettisoned about T plus 2 minutes and 43 seconds. We also have here listed the entry burn. That's conducted using 3 engines on the first stage to help slow it down for reentry and landing, and also the landing burn that'll be performed by the center engine on the 9-engine first stage to perform that final braking maneuver just before deployment of the landing legs and touchdown on the drone ship. That landing is expected at T plus 8 minutes and 49 seconds, about the same time that the second stage completes its burn to arrive in orbit. And then the Starlink satellites will deploy from the upper stage at T plus 15 minutes and 15 seconds. Here's a graphic and illustration provided by SpaceX showing the major maneuvers during the launch sequence. It shows the first stage separating, performing its flip maneuver using coal gas thrusters to orient to a tail-first orientation for reentry and landing. And that will be occurring while the upper stage continues its satellite deployment mission. It'll separate the payload fairing and then complete its 6-minute burn and then deploy the Starlink satellites in orbit.
Stage 1 fuel load complete.
This is the target orbit for today's mission, an apogee, or rather this is a mislabeled, an apogee of 208 miles, a perigee of 144 miles. That's 232 by 336 kilometers. And the satellites will use their onboard propulsion to raise their orbit to about 335 miles over the course of the coming weeks and months. T-minus 5 minutes and 32 seconds. In about the last minute and a half, we heard confirmation of a couple of milestones. The chill down of the first stage Merlin engines that began at T-minus 7 minutes, and the first stage has been loaded with its RP-1 fuel supply. So about 46,000 gallons of kerosene fuel has now been loaded into the Falcon 9. So the fuel load is complete. The oxidizer load will continue for another few minutes until about the T-minus 2 minute mark. Now T-minus 5 minutes and counting.
Tanks pressing for strong back retract. Strong back retract.
T-minus 4 minutes and counting. We've heard confirmation that the strong back has begun its retraction to its intermediate position You can see that strong back in motion now on the right side of the rocket. It'll move back to an angle of about 1.5 to 1.7 degrees from the Falcon 9. And at liftoff, the strong back will rapidly retract back to an angle of about 45 degrees as the Falcon 9 begins its vertical climb off of pad 40. 3.5 minutes until launch now. 53 satellites awaiting their ride to space this afternoon from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And there you have, we just heard the call out at T-minus 1 minute 45 seconds of liquid oxygen loading complete. So the Falcon 9 rocket is now fully loaded with about 1 million pounds of propellant awaiting liftoff from Space Launch Complex 40. The fill and drain valves should be closing now to allow the Falcon 9 to begin its final preparations for liftoff. The gas system closeouts have started now, T-minus 1 minute 15 seconds. At T-minus 60 seconds, the Falcon 9's onboard computer will take control of the countdown's final critical functions leading down to liftoff. T-minus 60 seconds, that final 1 minute countdown is underway. Falcon 9 has transitioned to startup. Onboard computer now controlling the countdown. T-minus 45 seconds. The SpaceX launch director has given his final go for liftoff. Everything looking good. 30 seconds until launch. This will be SpaceX's 37th flight of the year. T-minus 10 seconds. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine start. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 4-27 mission, carrying 53 more Starlink satellites into orbit. And the Falcon 9 has cleared the launch pad towers. T-plus 15 seconds. The Falcon 9 is pitching downrange now, heading northeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Here's a good view of the Falcon 9, a close-up telescopic view, T-plus 30 seconds. Everything looking good. 90 seconds into the flight, we just saw the Falcon 9 surpass the speed of sound. It's past maximum aerodynamic pressure. Everything looking good as the Falcon 9 heads northeast downrange over the Atlantic Ocean. Those 9 Merlin engines doing their work, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust, chugging kerosene fuel. T plus 1 minute 55 seconds. Mark 2 minutes since liftoff. We're now less than 30 seconds away from a series of events that will begin with main engine cutoff for MECO, when the Falcon 9's 9 Merlin engines will cut off. A few moments later, we should see stage separation, and then the second stage should ignite its Merlin vacuum engine. T plus 2.5 minutes, there's main engine cutoff. And there's stage separation. And second stage ignition. Good startup of the MVAC engine, Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage. You can see the first stage now doing its flip maneuver. Everything looking very good right now. You can see the payload fairing has jettisoned. Very good view of from a long-range tracker here at the Kennedy Space Center, showing the first stage, the two halves of the payload fairing, and the second stage continuing its climb to orbit. T plus 3 minutes and 40 seconds. T plus 4 minutes and 45 seconds. We've now switched to SpaceX's stream. These show some onboard views. On the left, you see the first stage. On the right, the second stage. This map provided by SpaceX shows the locations of the first and second stage as they continue their climb to space. Rather, the second stage is continuing its climb. The first stage is now descending toward the drone ship.
Stage 1 FTS is saved. Stage 1 entry burn.
A good view here from the first stage, T plus 6 minutes and 30 seconds. We should see the entry burn start up momentarily on the first stage booster. This is a downward facing camera. Two of the four hypersonic grid fins here are pictured in their deployed configuration.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
We've heard now verbal confirmation from the launch team that the entry burn did shut down. It started up and shut down on time apparently, but the video is with a bit of a lag, so we're just now seeing the video confirmation of that event.
Stage 2 FTS is saved. Stage 1 transonic. Terminal guidance.
Now 8 minutes since the launch, you're watching a view now of the second stage Merlin vacuum engine continuing its burn. About a minute, about 30 seconds left in this second stage burn. We're waiting updates on the first stage.
Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
We've heard now verbal confirmation that the stage 1 landing has been confirmed.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And we're seeing that landing burn underway here with about 30 seconds delay in the video feed from SpaceX. And there's the landing of Booster 1062 completing its 9th trip to space. Back on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas in the Atlantic Ocean, about 400 miles downrange from Cape Canaveral. Here you see the location of Stage 1 marked on the map on the drone ship. Stage 2 now in orbit after completing its orbit insertion burn. Now about 6 minutes from the expected time when the second stage will deploy the 53 Starlink satellites. SpaceX has ended their live webcast of the launch. However, we expect to continue to receive verbal updates from the launch team over the next few minutes. And we'll be streaming this map showing the location of the first stage and second stage. The second stage now flying in orbit at a velocity of roughly 5 miles per second, 8 kilometers per second, heading northeast now over the Atlantic Ocean. It'll be passing near the Canadian maritime provinces over the next minute or two, and then head out over the North Atlantic. Deployment of the 53 Starlink payloads is scheduled for T plus 15 minutes and 15 seconds. That's about 4 minutes and 15 seconds from now.
Acquisition signal, New Finland. Expected loss of signal, Cape.
Now 13 minutes since launch, here's a replay from a telescopic tracker showing the Falcon 9's climb off the pad earlier this afternoon at 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time. So you zoomed in view of the Falcon 9's reused payload fairing, and there are the 9 Merlin engines firing, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust, burning kerosene fuel. The Falcon 9 stands about 229 feet tall. A wonderful view of the Falcon 9 climbing into a clear sky, and there is Mach 1 passing the speed of sound there with the condensation collar over the payload fairing. Again, this is a replay of the launch of the Starlink 4-27 mission about 14 minutes ago from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. See the flame, the exhaust plume expanding as the rocket climbs through the thinner layers of the upper atmosphere. And in a moment, we might see main engine cutoff here. Again, this is a replay of the Falcon 9 launch nearly 15 minutes ago from Cape Canaveral, Florida. And there's main engine cutoff. So good first stage burn. And we later saw the second stage completed, 6-minute burn, and the first stage land back on the drone ship.
Expected loss of signal, Bermuda.
And we're just standing by for confirmation now of Starlink deployment.
Starlink stack separation confirmed.
And there's the call out from SpaceX's launch team that the 53 Starlink satellites have deployed from the Falcon 9's upper stage in orbit. So this will mark the successful completion of the launch sequence. The second stage will later today perform a deorbit burn to guide itself back into the atmosphere for a destructive re-entry. This is a measure to reduce the likelihood of creating any space junk from this launch. The Starlink satellites themselves are designed to also be propulsively controlled during re-entry when they are designed to entirely burn up at the end of their missions. You can see this deployment occurred over the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, south of Greenland, east of Newfoundland, west of Ireland. With this launch now complete, here's a look ahead at the next few launches on our schedule. These are the next launches that we have confirmed timetables for right now. On August 27th, that's the next scheduled SpaceX launch from here in Florida. Another batch of Starlink satellites will be going to orbit. This mission will originate from Launch Complex 39A, which you're seeing here on the eastern horizon here at the Kennedy Space Center. So another batch of Starlink satellites are scheduled to launch on a Falcon 9 rocket from this pad on August 27th. That is next Saturday, and that will be an evening launch. Then about 36 hours later, approximately, from Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center, NASA is scheduled to launch the first flight of its Space Launch System moon rocket on the Artemis 1 mission. Here's a live view right now of the Artemis 1 moon rocket on Pad 39B here at Kennedy. This launch is scheduled during a 2-hour window, August the 29th, opening at 8:33 a.m. Eastern Time or 12:33 UTC. This is a flight to send NASA's Orion crew capsule on a journey into lunar orbit And then the Orion spacecraft will perform some tests and checkouts around the moon and return to Earth for a splashdown in October. This is an uncrewed test flight that will pave the way for future astronaut flights on the SLS Orion system. There's also a Falcon 9 launch scheduled for late August. We don't have a confirmed date yet, from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, with another set of Starlink satellites going to one of the polar orbit shells in the Starlink constellation. And then the next launch from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral, the one that we saw in use today, is a Falcon 9 flight scheduled for no earlier than September the 4th, with another batch of Starlink satellites. This mission will also carry a rideshare payload, a propulsive space tug built by Spaceflight. It's called the Sherpa LTC-2. And that space tug will actually deploy from the Falcon 9 rocket and perform its own mission and climb up to an orbit about 1,000 kilometers above the Earth, where it will host an experimental technology demonstration payload called Varuna. This is a tech demo payload for Boeing to test out broadband communications for a satellite constellation for internet service that Boeing is currently developing. Again, this is a Starlink mission with a rideshare payload for Boeing, set for launch on September the 4th. We'll leave you with a live shot of the Artemis 1 moon rocket on pad 39B here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. A flight readiness review for the Artemis 1 mission is scheduled for Monday. And if all the management team participating in that review give their approval, the launch date will be officially set for and targeted for August the 29th. Right now, the launch is no earlier than August the 29th. We'll have live coverage, of course, of this Artemis 1 test flight on the 29th of August, if that's when it happens. And we'll also have ongoing coverage of SpaceX's launches over the next few weeks. One more time, if you want to support our coverage, you can join our YouTube channel. If you join our channel, depending on which membership level you choose, you can gain access to exclusive video features. And you'll also be supporting our coverage of the space industry and launch operations here in Florida and around the world. So until next time, I'm Stephen Clark reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center. Thanks for joining us.